Hi, everybody. I'm ObjectivelyDan, and I'm here to talk to you about ethics. What are ethics? Well, specifically, I want to answer the question of what do you do about ethics when you leave Christianity? This was one of the hardest things for me to get over back when I was deconstructing, because my entire life, I thought to be a good person meant to be a good Christian, and to be a good Christian meant to do whatever the Bible asked me to do, or whatever my Christian community asked me to do, or in general, whatever God asked me to do. But when you're an atheist, you don't really have that option. I mean, it really just doesn't make that much sense to follow a book that you don't believe in, or to listen to a God you don't believe in, or listen to a community that you're not a part of. So how do you figure out what to do with these concepts of right and wrong? And is there an objective right and wrong? Now, the truth is, ethics is a very complicated concept. You can talk about utilitarianism, consequentialism, deontology, virtue ethics. Lots of smart people have written about these subjects for thousands of years. And in fact, it dates back even older than the Bible. One of the first legal texts in history that we have is the Code of Hammurabi, which dates to about 1700 BC. So this stuff goes way, way back, and it's definitely not Jewish people or Christians that came up with the first idea of how to live your right from wrong. So how do you do this as an atheist? Well, again, this is a complicated subject, and I don't have time to go into every single specific, but I can give you some basic ground rules and ideas. And one thing I would say is consider your values. You see, I think ethics, at least part of the key to it, is that human beings in particular have values. They have desires, they have wants, and they have needs. If we lived in a world where there were no beings that had any desires whatsoever, in other words, just a world with rocks, dust, maybe some volcanoes, does it really mean anything to say we can do right or wrong? I mean, we're not really hurting anybody because there's no thing to hurt, right? So what does it even mean? Like, let's say there's a robot that just kind of lives in this world, and maybe there's two robots, and maybe these two robots get into a fight. But if they don't have any self-desire to live, for example, what does it mean for them to do right or wrong? See, I think the key to ethics comes from examining these values. And it may be the case that we live in a multipolar system of values. In other words, there's going to be values that may come into conflict, and there may be more than one right answer. Again, it's extremely complicated when you get into the nitty-gritty of philosophy. But the truth is, we're all people, we all go to our jobs, and we all have to live our lives. So how do we have practical ethics? I really think it starts with examining your values. What are your values? Do you value independence? Do you value reducing harm? Figure that out first for yourself. Next, what I would say you should do is ask yourself, why do you have these values? Now, this is interesting because you may have values for different reasons. Maybe your personality is more equipped to certain values than others. Maybe your faith community gave you a certain sense of values. I remember when I was a Christian, I thought you shouldn't use the Lord's name in vain because I had this idea of the sacred, something that you should respect. And the same went with the holy text as well, the Bible. Using the Bible out of context or defaming the Holy Spirit, which is explicitly counted as an unforgivable sin within the Bible, was also something that I valued because I thought having that, sacred relationship with those things was something that was worth having. I don't have that anymore because when I really question that, again, as an atheist, it really doesn't make any sense to me to have that value. I'm not really harming anything if I don't believe a God is there, or at least the Christian one. So you have to examine why you have some of these values, and you may figure out that they come from reasons beyond yourself. Something a lot of Christians figure out when they're deconstructing is their relationship with the LGBT community. Now, I don't think I have to tell you that the Christian church has had a pretty rocky relationship with the LGBT community historically. One argument that the church tends to cite is that marriage was created for a man and a woman, and this is specifically part of God's design. But if you don't believe in God's design, why can't a man marry another man? If that's fulfilling their desires, their wants, their needs, and they're not necessarily harming anybody else, what's the problem with that? And that's something that maybe seems like a plain fact for a lot of you, but for myself as a Christian, that was a pretty radical concept. Again, my only idea of what right or wrong was came from my community, came from my culture, and when you're inculcated in that, it can be hard to deconstruct some of those ideas. So, number one, figure out your values, and number two, question those values. The third step, I would say, is to test those values. Come up with different kinds of situations and see what you would agree with and what you wouldn't agree with. One of the very famous examples of this is something called the Trolley Problem. You probably have seen memes about this. It's gotten pretty popular recently. Basically, the idea is if you have some people tied to a railroad track but another railroad track that has 3 people on it, and the train is going towards the 3 people, but you can pull the lever just so you can get 1 person instead of 3, is it worth it to pull the lever? Now, this is kind of a conundrum that different ethical systems don't seem to share. And in fact, there's multiple kinds of trolley problems that lead to multiple kinds of answers. Some of these hypotheticals we may not be able to figure out, but you can come with lesser extreme tests when you come with looking at your values to see what works for you and what doesn't. So those are my 3 steps to figuring it out. Find out what your values are, figure out why you have those values, and test those values to see if they're worth having or if they're coherent and if they make sense. They may not always completely make sense. Again, there may be more than one right answer, but it's good to at least examine them so that you can be a better person, whatever that means for you. So I'm Objectively Dan. That's all I got for you today. I'll see you next time.